Do you want to do more than follow orders, think outside of the box, and manifest your dreams? Then you've come to the right show. Welcome to the award-winning podcast, Holding Down the Fort by US VetWealth. I'm your host, Jen Amos, a Gold Star daughter, veteran spouse, and entrepreneur. For Season 7, I am ecstatic to be in partnership with the Rosie Network to highlight motivational stories of personal growth, financial awareness, and autonomy in our military community. Now, let's get started. All right, hey everyone. Really excited. It's Thursday once again, which means that I am inviting you to step into my world here at US VetWealth with my husband and featuring someone else in our network who we're very fortunate enough to work with for some time. And so let me just open up with a quote from this individual. They say, "I wanted something different, but I didn't really know what. And you really don't know until you find it." So I get to have this conversation with my husband / co-host / business partner, Scott Tucker, for a 2-part interview with our former colleague, Gary Redman. We have a chance to catch up with him in his transition journey since we first connected with him well over a year ago. Gary shares that he took a deliberate 4-year approach to his transition rather than the typical 12 to 14-month planning advice. Gary reflects on his unorthodox approach to transition by cold messaging people on LinkedIn to learn about different careers, which is how I believe he reached out to us actually, getting a real estate license, to now working part-time for a startup in LA. In closing, the first part of this interview, Gary expresses how much he values autonomy and personal growth in future roles, and he touches on support from home as a key to taking career risks. Gary, it was such a pleasure having you on our show and, of course, working with us at the time that you did. We were so happy to, check in with you 1 year later and see how well you're doing. And so with that said, I hope that you all enjoy part 1 of our interview with Gary Redman. Enjoy.
Hi, welcome back to the Holding Down the Fort podcast with today's main host. I'm Scott Tucker, along with your regular co-host, my beautiful wife, Jen Amos. How you doing, Jen?
Hi, I'm really excited for you to take the reins for today because the majority of the season, I'm usually the main host or leading as the co-host. So you and Gary go back. So I'm just excited to listen in and ask questions when I have them. But the show is yours today. So don't mess it up.
No, that's a good thing about editing, right? Especially with this new AI tools. We can basically just, if you didn't know this, you can now have AI record your voice and you can type in, it sounds a little computery, but
it's so
crazy. It is crazy. But no, we're actually going back about a year and a half almost to kind of rehash a little mini show that Gary and I did. So first, let's welcome our guest, Gary Redman, coming to us from downtown LA. Apparently, are you dry after the hurricane you guys had out there? Is that real?
It was an arduous day and a half, but we had an earthquake in the middle of a hurricane. So I was like, man.
Oh my gosh, everything happened.
Had a 5.0 earthquake about 40 miles north of Thousand Oaks. So it was, I was like, man, all we need is a wildfire to have the trifecta of natural disasters on Sunday. So it was an eventful day, but we all survived and the sun is back out in sunny California. So it's nice.
All right. Well, good to hear California didn't have to suffer too much considering all that. So, we know Jen's grew up in California. That's where we met. So it's a special place in our heart. And
I do want to make a comment about it because one of my friends texted me about Joshua Tree and how it was going to be shut down because of the flash floods and all the things. And living in the East Coast for the last handful of years, I'm just like, it kind of makes me laugh to hear this stuff happening. And again, I'm coming from Cali, having lived there for 20 years and knowing what real weather is like now on the East Coast. When I hear stuff like this, I'm like, you guys are going to be fine.
Well, we joke about that too. I'm from Ohio, the Midwest. We went to school in New York. Gary, you went to school in Colorado. And then you hear about you might probably had classmates from Florida and it's like, we had an inch of rain. We shut down school for a week. And coming out of your environment, to caveat a little bit into today's discussion, is something that we wear on our sleeves a little bit about being in the military. Hey, we can adapt and overcome, and we can. We're actually really good at that. Yet, when it comes to getting out of the military, we tend to follow orders and say, well, the Navy's supposed to tell me how to get out of the military. Or the Navy's supposed to show me my job, or the Army's supposed to hook me up with how I'm doing the right. They're not doing a good enough job for me. They need to work on their military transition assistance programs. And of course, they've done that for the last 20 years. And then more nonprofits have come. And yet you always hear the same horror stories. Well, it's not even horror stories. It's guys who got out, got a job, and then usually say, well, it could have been better. It could have done this way. And what doesn't happen very often is someone saying to themselves, maybe I shouldn't have followed that process at all. Maybe it wasn't the military's job to get me a job. It's the military's job to assign me to a duty to help win our nation's wars. But we know what we signed up for. We know where we're getting out at some point. So, Gary, maybe you could just go back and rehash kind of how you found out about us and how you reached out. And then we can kind of talk about where we got started on and rehash a few things. And then we can hear about what you're up to now, what that's really led to. But no real agenda, just, wanted to start, getting your thoughts on, from a perspective of someone who's just like, yeah, maybe we'll go through some of those programs. Obviously, it's good information, but you're clearly putting yourself out there to go find your own path. So we're excited to hear about it.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. I will say, the key word I will use is deliberate. Like everything I did to prepare for this was deliberate, right? Like I started searching in 2020, knowing that I was going to retire somewhere in the 2024 timeframe. So a 4-year process, right? People say 12 months to 24 months. I say that's bogus because of this, because I wandered around the space for 2 years, and you met me during a phase of my life where I was wondering and trying to find that focus. And I think that's what a lot of people miss. They go through a transition and they get a job, but yet they still lack focus and clarity of what they want in their life. I've spent probably 2 years trying to do that, and it's getting better and better. It's not complete. And I think you ask any entrepreneur, and that is never complete. It's focused for a phase of time. Like you need to be focused for a 5 to 10 year time frame and then on to the next thing. I think if you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, you'll get that. And I spent late 2020, I just started hopping on LinkedIn and talking to people about what they did in their day job. I would spend, almost like cold calling really, is I would just reach out and say, hey, what is your day-to-day life like? Because I didn't, when I was 18, I went to the Air Force Academy and the military was all I knew. I knew at some point I wanted something different, but I didn't really know what that was. And you don't really know until you find it. Like, it's not really one of these things where like, I'm going to go. And that's what I think a lot of these transition programs lack is like, they ask you like, what do you want to do? And it's like, well, where do I need to focus my energy to help you find this job? And you don't have any idea. It's like you went to college again. It's like you're a college student wondering out what I want to do with my life. I've been told for 18 to 20 years what I'm supposed to like, what I'm supposed to, wear, what I'm supposed to do. And now you're going to say like, well, the world is yours. You can do whatever you want. And it just doesn't work that way. You have to put a lot of work to the point of a full-time job to be able to figure out that transition. So when we met in 2021, I'd got a real estate license and I'd started selling real estate. And that was kind of my first like, hey, let me dip my toe into the civilian workforce and figure out how some of this stuff works. I had some successes. I had some failures with that. And then I still do that part-time, but I found out like that wasn't really what I wanted to do as a full-time job. And it led me to, this is 2023, and I now work for a systems engineering startup in LA part-time when I have the opportunity, whether I'm taking leave or whether I'm doing it at night, doing some sales, business development, product development for them. But it took me 3 years to get to that point to figure out like, hey, working with a team I like, it's a small team. I have, autonomy within the team to be able to like make decisions. The CEO actually, values my opinion. And I've gotten to a point where I was like, yes, that's kind of what I'm looking for, if that helps. And again, my transition is not even complete. I'll caveat that of the transition programs, right? I've done a lot of them. I've done the Tuck Next Step program. I just got accepted to Stanford Ignite. Like I've done the Commit Foundation. I'm doing a workshop through the Commit in the Bay Area in 2 weeks. You cannot just do one of them. And through all of these processes and things I've done, a Defense Ventures program, people are looking to this as their one savior. They're going to do this one transition program and that's going to figure out their life, or they're going to go through TAPS class and that's going to give them all the information they need. it is holistically like you can take small snippets of each one of those things to put together to figure out what you really kind of want for your life and where you want to be. But it's not a one-stop shop from the transition point. Like you can't just be reliant on this one thing.
Yeah, I always think about it, or at least when we're talking about, US VetWealth, we're a financial-based company, and that's what I stumbled into. And I got out of the military, and I was, trying to find my path. But ultimately, once I realized, okay, I'm in this realm of entrepreneurship, and I honestly don't even like using that word because it seems so grandiose. No. It's just self-employment, or it's just controlling the source of your income. So whether I'm starting a business, I'm washing someone's car, or I'm trying to get hired by a corporation, aren't I working for myself? Aren't I trying to contract out my services for a fee, to some extent? So when I started thinking, so that reminds me a little bit of my own journey when I was getting out of the military, joined financial services. I thought I had a job. It took me many, many years to realize I was just a salesman. And then I said, okay, I don't feel comfortable being a salesman. So I told myself I didn't want to do that. And that was the wrong approach. I think anybody getting out of the military, the first thing they need to learn is sales, because that's just communication. You're going to use it to sell yourself. Duh. How are you getting a job? You're selling yourself. So again, as I started thinking to myself as an individual business or just an individual income producing entity, at first I thought, well, I could go to all these different conferences and events and learn all these new skill sets. And then you get wowed by some other entrepreneur who's selling you their stuff. So you're hiring things, you're buying software. And it took me just many, many years to finally recognize that, one, I need to just do this myself. I need to learn all the skills, every skill that could possibly be useful to be a self-employed business owner. That's how to do websites. That's how to make videos. That's how to, what kind of equipment do you need? I got to take courses on, I do got to learn sales. Well, that's really just communication and persuasion. Oh, they didn't teach us this at West Point, how to be a better communicator and persuasion. It's odd. So I just recognize that, and I call it a talent stack. I'm just continuing to build various skills, and they'll come up when they come up. And so what have you noticed because what you ended up doing is you helping out a startup, like you said, and that is, basically just kind of a wild environment. And even if it's a successful startup, I mean, there's startups like ours that are just, kind of winging it, but then there's ones that are they're established businesses. They're called startups for a reason, because there's a risk. There seems like there's more risk that's going to go away. But since you did do so many different programs, and I've heard so many good things, Tuck School, people love that, say it's amazing. I'm sure the Stanford thing, that's a big name. It's good for you. But are you noticing any particular little skills that you're having to develop and utilize quicker than you're getting by sitting in any sort of classroom environment, if that's how those are even done?
I think the thing that I have gotten most out of all those programs is I've been tapped into all of those networks, right? Like the network, people really say everybody's like, oh, you got a network. And I kind of hate that term. I like more of like building a relationship, like right with us. Like it's not a one-time deal. Like we have built a relationship over the past 2 years. And the same thing with any of these things. Like the best thing I got out of the Tuck Next Step is Dartmouth Entrepreneurship Network meetup here in LA. So everybody that went to Dartmouth in some form or fashion, I tapped into that network, and I will use the same thing from the Stanford Ignite of like, I want to be part of all of these networks. And that's really what, somebody made the cliche. I don't know who came up with this line, but like your network is your net worth. And I was like, it
was me. I made it up. No, just kidding. Yeah, I say it a lot.
Like it's absolute. Like, and I was like, well, what the hell does that really mean? Like, and now like I get it because, I look at a lot of people, like there's a lot of people here in LA that, whether they've been laid off at Amazon, at Google, and at some of these places. And they're like, hey man, like, can you help me find a job? Can you help me to do some of these things? And like, I have a sliding scale of networks. Like it's not just one network I'm in. I can hop in and out of different networks, but that makes me, at whatever job it is, it makes me a more confident person that I know that I'm going to be all right, whether I can stand up for what I believe in. Cause it's like, if you tell me to kick rocks one day, then I'm going to go to my other network and I'm going to find another job there. And I think that's what people fear the most about the military, and where you just become kind of a bobblehead or a yes man. And like that's the only network they know. And and that is just an anchor to them. So they're not willing to fight for what they really believe in, or they're not willing to stand up for the right things because they're scared they're going to be shown the door in some form or fashion, meaning shown the door of like, hey, I'm not going to promote, or I'm not going to make my boss happy, when in reality, like it really just leads to an unhealthy relationship within the organization.
Yeah. So really what I'm hearing is we can go to these groups and they're going to have lots of briefings and programs on how to do it. But it's what I always say, everybody thinks just having a veteran label on you is some sort of hookup. And unfortunately, the majority of Americans think, and that can go good and bad ways, because a lot of times people have had a bad experience with a veteran. And so they're going to label it that way. It's like we heard from one of our friends who was working for a defense contractor and showed some displeasure with how they were being used in this organization. And the boss told him, it's like, you know what? We don't want to hire any more 05s and 06s because you guys always tell us what to do. It's like, well, that's what you hired us for, because we were connected to the defense industry. And so now his skill of being networked, in tight to the military community, it just seems limited in so many ways. His value, his appreciation, probably the amount he's getting paid probably wasn't proper. And so while, these groups are about military transition that you're networking to, it seems different. You're smartly, these organizations are going to probably be tied into all sorts of corporations that aren't military related, and maybe even startups. How did you find this group that you're working with now? And tell us a little bit more about that whole setup.
It's a crazy path, and I'm glad. Again, it leads back to my cold outreach on LinkedIn. I reached out to an academy classmate of mine who had gotten out of the Air Force from LA Air Force Base back in 2012. And he had started a cannabis company in Santa Monica. And so he was in the startup tech space out here, had sold that, looking for his next thing. And really, he does a lot of consulting on the time, like CEO type roles and things like that to help other startups. And he kind of led me on to a partner at Techstars, a venture capital firm here in LA. I had a meeting with one of the partners on Zoom. He said, hey, send me your resume. They shot it out on Slack. And two founders got back to me with interest in my background. And I literally started having coffee. I would drive down to LA and have coffee with this founder once a month or so. And we would stay in touch until it got to that point. But again, we built a relationship. It wasn't like, hey, here's my resume. And my resume wasn't even perfect. And that's the funny thing too, is like, we spend so much time on these things that are irrelevant. Like people are like, oh man, I got to go to this resume prep class, or I got to do this to get this perfect, or I've got to write 20 different versions of that. No, man, screw that. Like, just build a relationship with the people and go from there. Like, I'm not like, a resume is important in the right setting, but like it's not everything. And I promise you, like, I'll get a job and I won't even need a resume to do that. So it's important to have that in line and LinkedIn line perfect, but like, it's not everything. It's consistent, like salesmanship, consistent, like pressure, talking to people, keeping those relationships warm, calling them every 2 to 3 months. And I still do a lot of that as well too, is like keeping a lot of those relationships warm.
You hit me up every once in a while and I'm like, hey, it's Gary.
Yeah. And I think, you talk about all of these transitional courses, like Tech Next Step, even Stanford Ignite, it's all going to be a fire hose of information. But I spend more time like on the soft skills and trying to figure out like, okay, where's the network valuable? Like, where can I have like this strategic advantage and build within their network of people? Like, I'm already thinking, like, I know some people that do Stanford entrepreneurship in DC, and they have networks out here and events out here. So there's already like figuring out how to work my way into those organizations to like add value. And at the end of the day, it's really add value, and you got to be humble about it too. It's like, man, I'm not like, the problem is I see again at my level, the 05 and 06 level, a lot of guys think they're experts at things. And that's the unfortunate thing about the military, I feel like, from the leadership standpoint, is there is a false sense of security that all these things. And because you have the rank on the shoulder, you do these things. So like, you leave the organization and you're like, well, I'm owed this amount of money and I should have this job. And no, man, like, no one, like, just to your point, like, yeah, people care that you're a veteran, but like, if you want the job and the big salary and the title at some point, like, you're going to have to hustle. Like, you could go back into the government and get a title and feel good about yourself and make a certain amount of money, but that's where it's going to plateau. But if you really want it, you got to be humble and be willing to hustle and do some of those things. And I work late nights. I drive to LA on my own time, on my own dime to do these things and to potentially put myself in a good opportunity. But like surprisingly, most people are just not willing to do it. And that's what it comes down to. Like, that's the key. Like, people are just not, they like it. It sounds like a great idea. Like, oh man, that's awesome. I wish I could do this. I wish I could do that. And then they just don't do it. So,
and that's why it works. That's what I always tell people is the reason why posting on LinkedIn or even doing direct outreach or doing some sort of podcast, writing a blog, book, it works because nobody else will do it. And so you'll stand out easily just as someone who's willing to, think outside the box a little bit.
And I really like how, you stay in touch with people like every 3 months or so. I am curious to know, Gary, like, do you have a system for that? Or is it just like something that it's just top of mind for you to like think of people every day and reach out, especially if you haven't spoken to them in a while?
Yeah, I mean, I should really start a process and a spreadsheet for that, because that's kind of what I do at this job is that's how I'll reach out to people. But a lot of time I'll really just like scan through my LinkedIn messages and see like, okay, who I haven't talked to in a while. And then I'll reach out to people via that, or, and there's a lot of people I meet that do a really good job of reaching back out to me. So it kind of helps out there. Actually, same way, like, there's a guy that I talked to that has an executive recruiting company in San Francisco. Like, we've never even met. We have a Zoom call about every 2 months, and I'm headed up there like next month. We're going to try to at least meet for the first time. But like, once you get into a mutually beneficial relationship with someone that's willing to stay in contact and have the meetings with you, like it's great. And then at some point, like, you never know. And that's the thing, like, you never know where it's going to go. It's not always about like everybody that goes through a lot of these transition courses. I watch them, I observe them a lot, and they're all showing up with an objective. They're all showing up with like, and that's the problem. I feel like a lot of times, like I see a lot of real estate agents do this, is like, and they're doing it full time. And right now, a lot of them are starving, and it's like they show up with an objective and it's too salesy and it's like too pushy. But a lot of guys going through the transition courses kind of the same way too, is like, there's an objective, like they just need a job. They're just, trying to get to the end and figure out this whole process. And it's, you can see the desperation a little bit. Whereas like, I just have the benefit of sitting back and just looking at the big picture of things and being like, okay, well, where do I fit in this place, or where do I fit in this role? And then try to build the best relationships I can within that group or organization. And I think, it paid off.
Yeah. I just wanted to share my thoughts on that. I really like this deliberate transition that you've done, where you're recognizing that there's no magic bullet, there's no magic pill. It's really a culmination of all your efforts, like what you're doing online, the effort you do to drive up to LA to grab coffee with people on your own dime, all these little things that you do outside of, the 9 to 5 or outside while you're still serving to build your community, build your network, like however we call it. And like you said, I do like that phrase, like your network is your net worth. And clearly, it's showing for you. And I also like how you weren't expecting one thing to fix it all. Like this took years in the making. You're talking about years of this transformation. And I think that's a good story to share, is that this is not like a quick fix. This is not like a sudden transformation. Like, it really is a process. It's a journey. And even now, like, you are still on that journey. It's not like you quote unquote made it. You are still pursuing that journey, which I think is life anyway. But the fact that you are so hands-on and involved and all that, I think is amazing and is a good example to our listeners. Hey, this is your host, Jen Amos. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of Holding Down the Fort by US VetWealth. Visit holdingdownthefortpodcast.com to access the full show notes of this episode, including resources mentioned and bonus content. Once again, that's holdingdownthefortpodcast.com. Lastly, stay after this outro music for something a little extra. Thanks again, and chat soon. Bye for now. Hey everyone, thank you for sticking around for the outro to hear about some bonus content here. If you have been following our show at this point from the very beginning, I want to say thank you. You could be listening to any other show, especially with better audio quality. And if this is your first episode of the show, then I'm going to say great, and also give you the heads up that this particular season, even with all the preparation and planning and all the things, and even with an amazing editor, shout out to Dennis, my audio quality has been different this season from past seasons. And at this point, I have learned to embrace it. It is what it is, and it's my hope that people will look past my audio quality and, more importantly, listen to the people who we are featuring on this show and what they have to say, because what they have to say is more important than my audio quality, if you ask me. And so anyway, that being said, I'm just really excited to have you join me here. And because you're here, I might as well invite you to a free resource we have sponsored by US VetWealth, which is actually our podcast portal. Our podcast portal at this point has so much content. You can't even imagine. I'll give you a quick overview if this is the first time you're hearing me in the post commentary. So some of the first episodes we release, actually, some of the first pieces of content we release in the podcast portal is podcasting basics for anyone that is just, looking to get their feet wet or get an idea of what it would be like to start a podcast. Also, I provide a consultation to a past guest on this show because they had reached out to me asking, what they can do to start a podcast, if they should start a podcast. Additionally, I also talk about my journey of moving my current private office back home. So I'm actively on that journey, and probably by the time this episode comes out, I've already moved home, and I'll probably talk about that in an upcoming commentary as well. And then also, I decided to share a productivity hack for anyone that is looking to set short-term goals. And I think this is especially great for people who maybe live a very unpredictable lifestyle, as most of us in our military do, and are looking for a way to still be productive, even if, your life is very unpredictable. So those are just some of the things that we have available. And the best part of it too is that once you access our portal and you're like, okay, I want a more convenient way to digest this content, we also offer a private podcast to supplement the portal. And so if you're looking for on-the-go content, you'll find out exactly how to do that in the portal. So once again, go ahead and check out holdingdownthefortpodcast.com/portal to create your free account today. And I look forward to seeing you there. And until then, I'll chat with you in the next episode. Tune in next time.